Evening, everybody. Welcome to another live episode of The Breakdown. It is September 15th, 2024. And I just want to kick things off by letting everybody know we're doing something new tonight. We have the new camera. It's up and running. We've done some beta testing with it. Hopefully it's going to make it through the entire show. So if it doesn't, we may pause things and then very quickly come back. But want to take a second to say a big thank you to everybody who has been supporting us through our Patreon page, as well as everybody who sent us e-transfers, because it was thanks to you that we were able to get this camera. And it does a lot more than just a webcam. It's a webcam, and that's cool, but it's also literally a portable video studio. And so we're going to be trying to have some fun with that at some of the major events coming up across the province in the next little bit. And that's the thank you and the plug to start things off. So let's just get right into it, because it was quite a week. There's some events coming. There's some other events coming, and we're very excited about next week's show in particular, because we've got a FOIP back, and it's spicy, but we couldn't put the whole thing together for tonight. So next week, it's going to be good. Starting right off, we got to talk about, how is this a thing? How does this continue to be a thing? For anybody who's listening to the audio version, what I'm talking about right now is the good folks at Calgary Lougheed have decided that one tinfoil hat convention isn't enough. We need at least two. Apparently, they're doing an ongoing series now, which is super horrifying. For anybody who's unfamiliar, the last injection of truth, air quotes, event that Calgary Lougheed put on was a bunch of largely discredited physicians, non-oncologists. I think there was a veterinarian, and they were talking about COVID. The COVID, we just can't let it go. And apparently they're following up with a second one. This one is called Injection of Truth Part 2. It happens Monday, October 28th. And this one has a subtitle. It's Follow the Money, which is good advice, I think, by and large. And maybe somebody will eventually do for them too, because their financials have got to be fascinating. But they've only announced one name so far, and we wanted to take a quick second to talk about that name. The name that they've announced is Doctor, and it's a PhD doctor. It's not a doctor of medicine doctor, but Dr. Dennis Rancourt, who is a physicist, which is not the same thing as a physician. And he's got quite the impressive CV. He was actually fired from the University of Ottawa for a number of complex reasons. There was a bunch of litigation that happened. It was a whole thing. But one of the biggest reasons why he was fired is he was giving entire classes. Every single person in the class who went to Dennis Rancourt's physics class got themselves an A+ in advanced physics. Now, I'm no physicist, but an A+ in advanced physics sounds like it should not be something that everybody gets. That's a hell of a curve. So he was, for that and other reasons that we don't want to get into. That was the big one. That was the one the university cited for parting ways with him. He also has some other thoughts that aren't related to physics, which, as we've seen from the good folks at the UCP Constituency Association of Calgary Lougheed, as long as you have some experience in some areas, they'll let you talk about just about anything as long as it has to do with COVID and vaccines. And sure enough, Dr. Rancourt is on the public record talking about COVID and vaccines. But some of the things he said are pretty wild. He claims there's never been any proof of a COVID-19 virus. He also claims that the symptoms were due to the psychological stress from the pandemic response. So you see, people weren't experiencing symptoms until after the pandemic response started, and all of those people who got symptoms or died did so because of some sort of fascinating little conversion disorder piece. Anyways, this is the first speaker that Dr. Rancourt, the physicist, again, not the physician, will be. This is the first person who's going to be speaking at the non-oncologist convention part 2. Also, reportedly speaking, not yet confirmed, will be Calgary Lougheed MLA Eric Bouchard, who hosts these events, who, by his own admission, and I can say this because we have video of him saying this, his businesses were failing catastrophically before COVID. And then COVID happened and he had something new to blame it on that wasn't his own. I don't know if the word incompetence is the right word. Lack of business acumen might be another possibility. I'm really not sure what it would be. But anyways, he blamed COVID, and allegedly also UCP MLA Scott Sear, who, if you go to our Twitter timeline, we're not going to get into it tonight because it would take the whole show to go through. But Scott Sear has some very, very close ties to a gentleman named Mitch Silvestri, who is a fascinating character because he was, I think he still is, the president of the UCP Constituency Association in Scott Sear's area. He's also somebody who likes to put Uncle Sam on promotional materials talking about how every Albertan should have the exact same gun rates that Americans have, because of course they should. They shouldn't. We shouldn't. No one should. Those gun things get kids killed. So let's not do those. And he's also super tight with Take Back Alberta. He's been identified as a Take Back Alberta captain. They moved away from the belts, apparently, as soon as David Parker moved away from the province. So, do with that what you will. Some fascinating court developments happened this week. We're going to start with the Coutts convictions, the sentencing of some, not all, but some of the Coutts conspirators. Anthony Olenek was given 6 years for possession of the firearms conviction. He was given a concurrent 6-month sentence for mischief, an additional 6 months for possession of a pipe bomb. So there's some legalese that we got to break down there. Concurrent means you're serving it at the same time. So you can have 20 concurrent 6-year sentences, and the maximum that you'll serve is 6 years because you're serving them concurrently. If you were going to be serving them consecutively, then they would add up on top of each other. So it's a concurrent sentence, not as exciting as a lot of people thought it was. Chris Carbert. I'm going to do the Colbert report. Chris Carbert was given 6.5 years for the firearms offense and a concurrent 6-month term for mischief. From the story, both Olenek and Carbert used the blockade as a last stand against police, the judge said in his sentencing decision. They knew they were actively participating in something that was illegal, but they didn't care because they thought their cause had been worthy. He added, the law does not allow people to take the law into their own hands. Now, there's some other sentencing that's still upcoming, maybe a little bit delayed. Apparently, the sentencing hearing for none other than Marco Van Hogenbos has been delayed. His lawyer isn't his lawyer anymore. Marco put up a tweet earlier, and there's no date for the sentencing, so don't warm up the popcorn just yet. Moving on from there, it's amazing that this guy keeps popping up in the public ether. We did not Photoshop this picture. This is from his Twitter. We're talking, of course, about former Justice Minister, former Minister of Health, and inciter of many physicians, Tyler Shandro. He's got a new gig. Got a little bit of media attention this week because there's some questions and potentially some concerns about what his new gig. And so we're talking about an organization called Santis Health. It was touted. They did a whole release a little while ago where they talked about the fact that Tyler Shandro, Alberta's former Minister of Health, joins Santis Health. And they talk about how they're looking forward to Tyler contributing his broad depth of experience in both public law and public sector to Santis. And then this is where I don't know. I feel like maybe they should talk to some physicians before they do their little press release here. As an elected official, his track record of enacting change within the healthcare system is a testament to his effective leadership, engagement, and this is the line I love, bias for action, which will help Santis clients tremendously. Now, you're probably wondering, well, what does all this mean? There's not a whole lot of clear definition as to what he's going to be doing, but the bio on the Santis website now says, as a senior advisor, Tyler serves as an advisor to the Santis team and its clients on key initiatives in the areas of health policy. Here's the important part: government relations and stakeholder engagement. Now, there are some people who have, rightfully or wrongly, raised some concerns about the government relations piece, because Tyler has some other gigs that he does. One of those gigs is he's on the board for Covenant Health. Covenant Health is who Danielle Smith has kind of identified as the organization that she's looking to take over hospitals in the province of Alberta. She's talked about the fact that AHS, maybe they can't do the hospital things so well, so maybe we need to give it to Covenant Health. We did a whole deep dive on that a couple of episodes ago. Definitely worth taking a listen to, because Covenant Health's track record is actually arguably worse. They have, in fact, closed ERs on multiple occasions, and they have also capped patients, where they've said that their hospitals are simply not going to accept any more patients, which again isn't great. So there's that too. Tyler Shandro is on the board of that organization, and he's now working for a company where his big roles are going to be health policy, government relations, and stakeholder engagement. So no conflict there. Moving on from there. I'm going to walk this little line as carefully as I can, because former Justice Minister Jonathan Dennis was found guilty in a hearing with the Law Society of Alberta. This has been a bit of an ongoing saga where Mr. Dennis was brought up on allegations from a couple of different folks. And it's worth taking a look at what those allegations are, because it tapers into a broader story that the Western Standard, the good folks at the Western Standard, who always make sure they're telling the story in the best, most accurate way possible. They did a little narrative. We're going to talk about that in a sec. But when we're talking about Jonathan Dennis, in the first count, Dennis was accused of acting in a conflict of interest when he represented two families of two teenage girls. One was the driver. The other one was the passenger. And they had been involved in a car crash. Now, this is where it gets kind of weird. After the crash, one of the girls, the driver, her dad apparently got Jonathan Dennis as a lawyer to deal with the whole situation. The dad and the girl gave a statement to Dennis, and her father sent photos of the crash scene to Mr. Dennis. And then they didn't hear very much, other than there was apparently a reply. Months after that initial meeting, Dennis served that family that he was initially representing with a lawsuit on behalf of the passenger. So the allegation was, in effect, that he had kind of hopped clients to choose the best one, like porridge, but more morally complicated, perhaps, than porridge. In the second citation, he was accused of threatening a woman's employment on behalf of a client. That client had dated her. Reading from the story, after the woman learned she'd been dating one of Dennis' clients, after the woman learned the man that she'd been dating, one of Dennis's clients, was married, she contacted the wife to let her know about the husband's infidelity. Dennis then sent a cease and desist email to the woman, and this is where it gets tricky, folks, threatening to tell her employer she had violated its code of conduct. The Law Society of Alberta found that the two emails to the woman from Dennis contain clear evidence that Mr. Dennis twice made a threat. The act is clear, said the committee. If the complaint is justified, should it be made, not threatened. Can't be making threats to advance a legal case, because if the person's doing something that's demonstrably legitimately bad, then you have to follow through on the complaint, because otherwise you're just using the complaint for leverage, which would be really, really bad. So there's that. But the Western Standard didn't take very long at all to hop on the subject. Corey Morgan, who does not like us very much. He has us blocked on all the things. He wrote an editorial. Industry associations are crushing careers on behalf of the left. I want to take a sec to read from this prose that Mr. Morgan offered. The same vindictive and vicious leftists have learned that if they threaten the careers of conservatives through complaints to professional associations, and they are using that tool as a means of political intimidation. Many people with strong views may choose to keep their views to themselves for fear of complaints to their associations. This is not a healthy development in a democracy. So this goes back to, I mean, first of all, let's be clear. When we're talking about professional associations and governing bodies, self-regulating bodies, we're not talking about associations in the context of, we're not talking about these things in the context of organizations that are just clubs. These are serious bodies that are designed to regulate the institutions that they're responsible for. When we're talking about those institutions, they're governed by legislation. They're not just ad hoc things that are thrown together. And so when we're talking about the situation with regulatory bodies, and the accusation that the left are the ones that are contacting regulatory bodies to try to influence and intimidate. Boy, one sure would hope that Mr. Corey Morgan would be absolutely certain that it hasn't been the right that's been doing that. And it looks like we're experiencing our first technical difficulties of the night. So we're going to pause for just a quick second while we switch back to our old camera, and we will be right back. So to all of you in the chat, talk amongst yourselves. To all of you in the spaces, we'll be back in just a sec. All right, there we go. We had to go to our backup camera real quick in order to make the things work again. Um, but we're back now, and we're gonna soldier on, because it wasn't just the Coutts boys that got into trouble, that had new headlines this week. It was also a certain publisher of a certain Western Standard News, I guess, publication. We got to talk about Derek Fildebrandt for a sec, because his trial started on Wednesday and wrapped up a little bit later in the week. So it started on Wednesday, and that was where the teens testified. So for anyone who's unfamiliar, Derek Fildebrandt has been accused, charged with threatening to kill some kids. Just another normal day in Alberta politics. Derek Fildebrandt was charged with issuing death threats to 4 teenagers. The teens testified that after a 14th birthday party, they were waiting for a friend, and they were going to meet their friend after having done some birthday party stuff and continue on with the celebrations as 14-year-olds are wont to do. They were waiting in front of Fildebrandt's house for a few minutes. They were talking amongst themselves, playing on their smartphones, as 14-year-olds are want to do. And they noticed that there was this shifty guy looking through the windows. He looked upset. He looked angry, as if he's almost come from an airport in Eastern Canada, where he, in an absolutely sober manner, did a whole rail about tampons in the men's washroom. That gentleman then came out of the house, and this is where the stories diverge. The kids say that the man was holding something in his hand. We were all arguing about what it was, and then he said, he allegedly being Derek Fildebrandt, "I'm going to shoot you." And then we were confident it was a shotgun. Another one of the kids testified that Fildebrandt said, "I'll shoot you if you come back here." The kids ran. Fildebrandt chased them. I don't even think I have to say that he allegedly chased them, because in the court statement, including the 911 tapes, Mr. Fildebrandt's on the phone saying, "Oh, I'm chasing these kids down. I've been attacked," is one of the turns of phrase that was apparently being used. He drove his truck up onto the sidewalk. Things got silly. Derek went home. The police came in and said, and Mr. Fildebrandt's his version of things was a little bit different. The way that he said it was, "I yelled like an angry old man with a cane on the sidewalk. That's the extent of it," Fildebrandt told police. "I'm an old man with a cane." Yelling at them to get off my lawn. He's 38. Derek Fildebrandt is 38. If he's an old man, I'm not prepared to be whatever that makes me, because I've got a decade almost on Mr. Fildebrandt. So the idea that 38 makes someone an old man is not something that I'm prepared to handle. He says, "I'm an old man with a cane yelling at them to get off my lawn." The 38-year-old former politician said, explaining he believed they had vandalized ornaments telling dog animals not to let their animals pee on his property. And that is frustrating when people, it's more the poo. When people leave like dog poo on your lawn, that's horrifying. That's no fun. A little bit of dog pee, what are you going to do? People walk their dogs. Fildebrandt was unable to determine what, if any, damage they may have caused to the lawn signs. So he thought that they were breaking the lawn signs, but he wasn't able to determine if there was any damage to the lawn signs, which were worth about $20 to $30 at most. And, isn't it just the case that if you're going to threaten to kill children, it should be over something that's worth at least more than $10 to $15. The $20 to $30 range, clearly, that is a range that is acceptable to threaten to kill children over, allegedly. That's despite the fact that Derek Fildebrandt told a 911 dispatcher from the driver's seat of the truck. So he's on the phone as he's chasing these kids down in his pickup truck that he was under attack. In retrospect, he admitted the term was overly strong language. Now, this is where the Western Standard starts to Western Standard a little bit, because their first article on September 11th had the headline, "Court Hears Teens Felt Threatened by Cave-Waving Fildebrandt." So it's not like the publication that Derek Fildebrandt owns put up a headline that was in any way biased, right? Because he's just a guy with a cane. He didn't threaten to kill them and then run them down with his truck and drove on a sidewalk. That's not what happened, except the only part that's up for debate is whether or not Derek threatened to kill them. The fact that he chased him down in a truck, that is known. That's something that everybody agrees to. The fact that he drove up on the sidewalk. There's even doorbell cam footage of the truck driving and the kids running. So it's not like it's just, oh, these kids felt threatened by the cane. I feel like they probably felt threatened by the "I'm going to shoot you," allegedly, and then the getting into the pickup truck and chasing them down. But that wasn't the only story they ran. They also ran a story that was, the headline was a little bit more objective. Western Standard publisher Fildebrandt takes stand in his own defense at uttering threats trial. And this is where my favorite part of the testimony comes in, because Fildebrandt said he told police that he was doing a Grandpa Simpson routine and shaking his fist and the cane in question. And I mean, that's funny for a whole lot of reasons, because he's 38. He's not even 40 yet. He is so far from his Denny's discount, it's laughable. But he's also trying to make a pop culture reference that just doesn't land, because you can go back and watch any episodes of The Simpsons, and Grandpa Simpson, Abe, he doesn't use a cane. So there's that too. But that wasn't the only drama that Derek had this week, because there's not to say that Derek has a predilection for making threats to try to get his way. Absolutely not saying that. But he did tweet this, where he said earlier today, Charles Rusnell, who is a very well-known, very well-respected investigative journalist, formerly worked for the CBC, now does a lot of work for the Tyee, tweeted a statement that implied that the Western Standard accepted the Trudeau's government media subsidy. The allegation is false. Now, let's just unpack that for a sec. The statement implied. The allegation is false. Okay, I'm not sure how an implication equals an allegation, but whatever. Western Standard VP Operations, Jimmy Bianchi is the Twitter handle for James Fildebrandt, who is the VP Operations. I don't know why we have those two different. The name is so disassociated from the Twitter handle for an organization that thrives on transparency. Responded shortly after advising that the tweet was false and suggesting that it be deleted. Rusnell's reply was, "LOL. Our reputation is important to us, so our external legal counsel has sent Charles a retraction demand, and if the demand is not met, we will be filing a claim and the record will be corrected." Now, the tweet has been deleted. The implication, which was very clearly a joke, because what the tweet referenced was an event which is complicated for a whole lot of different reasons. One of them is it's being hosted by the Rebel. The other one is the keynote speaker is Premier Danielle Smith. So she's the keynote speaker at a for-profit event for a fairly far right-wing entertainment, by Ezra Levant's own admission, publication. And if you want to go to the tickets to the event, which has a secret location, because drama, I guess, they have a couple of different prices. One of them is mainstream Trudeau-funded media pass, $500. And in effect, not getting the words exactly right, but in effect, what Mr. Rusnell had tweeted was, I guess, the Western Standard's paying the $500 because they're state-funded media. Now, Derek apparently, and Mr. Bianchi, I don't know, they want to make it very clear to everyone that they are absolutely not state-funded, at least not by Trudeau. And this is where it gets really, really interesting and honestly kind of fun for us, because as we have made clear on multiple different episodes of the show, and asked for comment from Mr. Bianchi, Finkbeiner, I don't know. We've never gotten a response from him. We had two little tweets that we put up and tagged Derek in today, asking if he wanted to provide some context or comment for how it's not okay to accept the state funding from Mr. Trudeau, but it is okay to accept two sole source contracts that each are worth roughly $20,000, almost $40,000 in there. But the bigger question, and the one that we've never been able to get an answer to, because we did do a FOIP on it, is the Western Standard has also run multiple advertising campaigns for the government of Alberta. We FOIPed all of those. We got a list of all of them, multiple different ministries. They had ones that they did with mental health. They had ones that they did for the Winter Games. They had ones they did for the Treasury Board. They had ones they did for the Ministry of Energy and Minerals. So the Western Standard is very, very comfortable, it appears, taking money, taxpayers' money, state funding from the right sources. And that's all that the Russell thing was. It was very clearly, to anybody with a very basic reading comprehension, a joke. But what's not funny is, again, we have asked Derek 2 times in the last 36, 48 hours if he would be willing to be transparent, because transparency and integrity is everything to their business model. If he'd be willing to take out the little blurred out bits on the FOIPs that we got with the amount of money that the Western Standard got from those advertising campaigns for the government of Alberta after Danielle Smith, their former employee, business associate. I'm not quite sure how that arrangement worked. After she became premier, he just won't answer us, though. It's all very confusing. But the Rebel isn't the only folks that are doing a live event, which brings us to our next little piece. Danielle Smith is going to be doing a provincial address. The address to the province, September 17th at 6:50. So you can bet it's going to be exactly 10 minutes. And there's been a lot of speculation as to what's going to be going on. What's Danny going to be addressing? She's alluded to a couple of things. The big one that she's alluded to is schools. We've already done a couple of episodes on the state of schools. The fact that there is wild overcrowding, teachers are burning out already, and we're only in like week 2 of the school year. But the administrative burden that's being placed on teachers is enormous. And it's only about to get bigger with the policies that Danielle Smith is going to be doing, punching down on trans kids and LGBTQ2S plus youth, because the amount of, and any kid who wants to get any kind of decent education when it comes to human health and reproduction, because all of these things are being massively changed to put a much larger administrative burden on teachers. Allegedly, part of the big announcement that we're going to see on Tuesday has to do with how Danielle Smith is going to fix schools. I wonder if she's going to break them all up into separate pieces. That would be totally off-brand. But that's not all that we got to talk about in regards to Danielle Smith, because there's a lot of other stuff that's going on. We're going to try to do this in as linear a pathway as we can, because Danny had a very, very, very busy week. And it started with the Sean Newman podcast. So for a little bit of context, we're going to play a couple of clips from the Sean Newman podcast where Danielle Smith kind of tilted her hand a little bit on a couple of issues, and where she surprised some folks with some of her answers, quite frankly, because Danielle Smith is one of the people who said that she was hoping for a victory at Coutts when it came to the insurrectionists who were illegally blocking the border with guns to have a last stand with the police, which I can now say with confidence because that's what the judge said happened. But she was a big whoop whoop for the Coutts boys, and part of her whole campaign for leadership was to look at ways to make things easier for the Coutts boys, make things easier for everybody who tried to stand up to the tyranny of reality. And she was asked about the Coutts verdict and the sentencing on that podcast.
And the decision this week.
Well, look, I mean, I wasn't in the courtroom. I didn't see the evidence. It was a jury of their peers, which I think is important because a jury trial is sacrosanct in our country and in our province. And they looked at the evidence, rejected some of the charges and accepted some of the others. And so that's I think that's where we find ourselves. I think we've got to support the process because that is, I think everybody wants to be able to know that if they're facing any kind of criminal justice issue, that a jury of their peers will be who they go before. And that's what the outcome was. So I don't want to judge what the jury saw, why they came to the verdict that they did. But I think people should feel some confidence that the jury trial system is an important part of our process, and that's the outcome then.
Which is quite the pivot. And it's also pretty wild that Danielle Smith would try to say, hey, I don't know, I haven't been following it at all, you guys. I definitely haven't been getting any sort of emails or correspondence or anything like that from any of the people that were involved, or their friends or their families. I haven't seen anything like that. I don't know what went on in the courtroom. I haven't been doing anything to stay abreast of it. So, the important thing is, given that I don't know anything about that situation at all, it was a jury of their peers. So, what are you going to do? Which is, in a sense, the right answer, because they had a fair trial. A jury of their peers convicted them. A judge sentenced them. That's how the system is supposed to work. It's a little disingenuous, though, because again, Danielle Smith made a lot of promises in the leadership race, and she talked about how closely she was following the whole situation at Coutts. And then all of a sudden to turn around and to say to all of the Take Back Alberta people, oh, hey, you know what? I just can't keep up. I've been so busy. The multiple vacations, they just take so much of your time. That's a pretty bold choice. It's the technically legally correct thing to say, but again, it's a little disingenuous. But that was just the start of the complexities that played out on that show.
News out of bringing up.
Not true.
None of it's true?
Not true.
None of it?
Look, how can I talk about making sure that everyone has the right to accept or refuse medical treatment and then go that direction? I believe in choice. And importantly, I believe in the right to be able to say no to a medical intervention, including not being able to say no to a vaccine. And that is what our guiding principle going into it. And so that's what people will see.
Now, a lot to unpack there, because the LifeSite News article, we talked about it on our last episode, and it had a lot to do with an article that came out of this online website called LifeSite News, where they cited an MLA speaking with them. They cited two high-level people in the UCP speaking with them and talking about what was going to come forward in the Alberta Bill of Rights. And this on top of the fact that Danielle Smith is moving people over, moving at least one hospital over, and threatening to move other hospitals over from the public system of Alberta Health Services to the private-ish, religiously run hospital system. And there's been a lot of concerns that have come up in regards to women's access to reproductive care, women's access to health care. And one of the defenses that has been marched out is, hey, you know what? It's not that big of a deal, because really we only do emergency hospital or emergency abortions in the AHS facilities. So, I mean, that's pretty rare that would even become an issue. Elective abortions, where a woman is exercising her right to choose, or chosen abortions would probably be a better way to say it. Those are really only done in two clinics in Alberta. So, it's not like Covenant not providing these services is going to make a big dent, except, yes, it is. because as was reported in the Cochrane Eagle, there's actually a lot of examples where the amount of abortions are no longer being done via surgical procedures, the classic abortions that most people visualize. 25 to 40% of abortions are now performed using medication rather than surgical interventions. And AHS confirmed to the Cochrane Eagle that, yeah, those medications do get prescribed at AHS facilities and at AHS hospitals. So to say, well, the choice abortions, those are only done in the clinics, is not accurate. The article went on to say, notably, the North, Central, and South zones accounted for 20% of total mifgimizo, I'm saying that so badly, doses, which is the abortion drug that's in question here, dispensed in 2023. The spokesperson for AHS confirmed in an email the drug is available in its facilities. Mifgimizo is available on the AHS formulary for clinicians to use in clinically appropriate situations, such as medical termination of second trimester pregnancies. The drug is also used in the treatment of miscarriage. That is a drug that a lot of people are very concerned Covenant Health would not be providing. So there's a lot of communications gamesmanship that's going on in regards to the abortion conversation in the province of Alberta. But the reality is simply this: the more hospitals that Covenant Health takes over, the less access women will have to abortion, period. But Danielle Smith went on, because she wasn't just talking about the LifeSite News article. She had some thoughts that she wanted to share about immigration, because the last time she was on the Sean Newman podcast, she threw out some pretty big numbers in regards to her immigration goals for the province of Alberta.
To double, and you could tell I wasn't ready for that. I was like, what? And then we talk about that, and then that exploded, and then you went on the Western Standard and talked about it and everything else. You still want Alberta to grow to 10 million? People, and I should clarify this question, as a ton of people who listen to the podcast are like, you got to follow up on this.
Look, I mean, you have to put things into context. A couple things, I would say, is what frustrates me is Quebec has more political power than we do. And you can see it right now. François Blanchet.
Oh, Blanchet, yes.
Wanting to form a partnership with the Liberals to prop them up so he can extort more money out of Alberta. That infuriates me. And the reason they are able to get away with that is because Quebec has double our population. So my thinking is, if we had more population, we'd have more political clout. That was sort of the context of it.
So Danielle Smith was very clear that what she wants to see is, if we have a bigger population in Alberta, then we'll have more representation in the country. So if we just really, really, really populate Alberta with, apparently, as we'll see over the next couple of minutes, the right kind of people, then we'll be able to have all the political influence in Canada that we want. And things did escalate from there, because Danielle Smith on September 12th put out a tweet where she made some pretty big claims. And it was, as we're going to demonstrate, a pretty big about face. So the full statement was, Alberta's government is opposed to the federal government's plan to relocate tens of thousands of asylum claimants to Alberta, especially without any financial assistance to support the province in doing so. False. Alberta has always welcomed newcomers who possess our shared values, and we will continue to do so. However, last year alone, a record of over 200,000 people moved to Alberta. That's like adding 2 near Red Deer-sized cities in just 1 year. Although Alberta represents only 11.8% of the Canadian population, we are currently supporting approximately 22%, over 70,000, of Ukrainian evacuees who arrived in Canada. Section 95, because it's about jurisdiction with her, of the Constitution is clear. Immigration is an area of shared authority between the federal government and the provinces. Yet the Trudeau government's unrestrained open border policies, permitting well over 1 million newcomers each year into Canada, is causing significant challenges, and it's simply not sustainable. Excessive levels of immigration to this province is increasing the cost of living and strains public services for everyone. Now, this is pretty wild because Danielle Smith just a few months ago made the argument, hey, you know what? If we get all these new people to Alberta, then what we'll be able to do is have a bigger tax base. So not only will we have a bigger percentage of the population of Canada, so we'll have more political clout, but we'll have more taxes. So we'll be able to buy more things. Those skybox seats don't come cheap. She didn't say the last part out loud, at least, but that was the crux of her argument. But there is a particularly complicated dog whistle that's going on in this statement. And this is the part about Alberta has always welcomed newcomers who possess our shared values. Now, there's a lot to unpack there because the immediate questions are, well, what shared values are we talking about? Because when you take a look at the diaspora of Alberta, there's a lot of shared values that aren't actually all that shared. And you don't have to look much farther than the COVID-19 pandemic and the stories that we talked about earlier. There are people who believe that they are above the law. There are people who believe that they can take the law into their own hands. That is a violation on the most base level of something called social contract, which is the idea that if you live in a society and you get the benefits of living in that society, you also agree to follow the rules of that society. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to accept the rules blindly. You can use the mechanisms that exist within that society to change the rules. You can write new legislation. You can challenge things in court. All of those levers exist for people to pull on, but you don't get to just spontaneously say, I'm going to take over a border because I want to. We saw that there wasn't that many shared values when it came to the COVID response, particularly the longer periods of the COVID response, because people got tired and people got frustrated and they were worried more about what they wanted to do and whether or not some people were worried more about what they wanted and what they were able to do. Like, I really, really want to go to my Boston Pizza. So the notion that there is some sort of ironclad definition of shared values is a little complex. The Premier herself tried to interfere in the administration of justice. She tried to influence an investigation that was going on. Is that a shared value of Albertans? Is going to skyboxes and changing the rules around what sort of gifts politicians and staffers can accept so they can get access to the most prestigious events in the most prestigious of ways so that they can potentially be influenced, so they can be exposed to conflicts of interest. Is that a shared value of Albertans? But that's not really what that line is about. That line is a dog whistle. And it's a dog whistle that leans on tropes surrounding xenophobia, fears of immigrants, fears of the other. And it's quite frankly appalling that that sort of messaging would come out of the Premier's office. And it's hypocritical too, because as was pointed out by the Minister of Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship, Mark Miller, in March, Danielle Smith sent a letter to the federal government saying that she wanted to increase immigration. She said that because Alberta's labor market continues to grow to show strength, we needed more workers to come to the province. She celebrated the substantive number of Ukrainian refugees. She talked about the fact that there was a lack of opportunity for those temporary residents to gain permanent residency and continue to live and work in Alberta. She requested a further 10,000 allocations for Ukrainian refugees, in addition to the 20,000 the province was already seeking for economic needs. So Danielle Smith made the argument that Alberta needed more approval for more Ukrainian refugees to work in the province of Alberta because it's what the economy demanded. But now that she's got a leadership review, she's leaning into all of the ridiculous tropes that exist around the immigration conversation. And as we'll see as we go through the Your Province, Your Premier shit show that we're about to wade into, she leaned into it even harder. because that brings us to Saturday. And on Saturday, Danielle Smith appeared on her Your Province, Your Premier, and there was quite a bit of conversation that went on. Now, a lot of this has to do with the Green Line, and there's a couple of things that we want to highlight really quick before we get into the actual clips from Your Province, Your Premier. There are a lot of people who are deeply, deeply concerned about how the government of Alberta made a promise at the beginning of August that the funding for the Green Line, 100% secure. The city of Calgary could bank on it. And then a month later, they pulled the plug out with little to no warning whatsoever. Now, there's been a bunch of statements that have been issued, but one of the most compelling ones comes from the Calgary Construction Association. And they released this statement on September 5th. The provincial government's decision to unilaterally claw back funding for the Green Line LRT sets a concerning precedent for all future infrastructure projects across Alberta. This move sends a clear signal that no project, regardless of its scope or significance, is safe from unexpected funding cuts. The resulting uncertainty introduces a huge element of risk for contractors and businesses involved in provincial projects, undermining confidence in the stability and the reliability of government commitments. If this trend continues, it could jeopardize future investments, delay critical infrastructure developments, and hinder economic recovery efforts across the province. Now, Danielle Smith spoke to this on September 11th in a scrum. This piece of video was captured by Adam McVicker.
To doing is asking an engineering firm to give us an alternate route. See, if we start at where the event center is going to be, also with a future Union Station in mind, how far south can we go? How much would it cost and how do we get there? And then let's talk about using, I've committed to the mayor that once we get that back, we'll bring it to them and see if they're committed to continuing to partner with us on that. We've reached out to our federal counterparts as well to let them know that that's the approach that we would like to take. And then the second phase of that, we'll see what would be the alignment for us to be able to serve North Calgary as well. And it may be that using the Deerfoot Valley on the route to the airport and then further up to Airdrie, which is one of the things we want to do using the existing CP rail line, maybe that's the best way to serve North Calgary. I think we have to keep an open mind.
So a couple of things that Danny said, though, that is important to pay attention to. The first one is she doesn't want the Green Line running from downtown proper anymore. She wants it running from the events center. So she wants a train that runs from the event center all the way down to Seaton. And there are some interests in that project that we do have to talk about because Danielle Smith does, her former employer prior to working for the UCP as leader and Premier of Alberta, her former employer was a group called the Alberta Enterprise Group. And there were a lot of folks who had deeply vested interests in making sure that the arena deal went forward. So given that, it's a little bit of a, so all of your corporate besties that used to sign your checks, they're going to get a train directly from the event center all the way down to South Calgary. Now, the other thing that's important to take out of that clip is Danielle Smith makes it very, very clear. She now views the Green Line not as one contiguous project connecting North Calgary to South Calgary. She now views it as two separate projects entirely. And she's also very clear in that clip and in more to come that, maybe it doesn't even have to be like an LRT for North Calgary. Maybe it could just be like a train. Maybe we could just share the rail lines with CP Rail because they've got space and aren't busy at all. Didn't we just have a whole thing about how catastrophic interruptions to the rail system would be? I can't remember. Oh, wait. Yes, I can. Yes, we did. But Danny wants to put passenger trains running back and forth from North Calgary to at least the core, wink, on those rail lines, which is a pretty wild approach. And it also is pretty wild that Danny would sort of start leading into hey, the rail system's the way to go, because she just finished getting in hot water about her husband being invited to a secret meeting, as documented by Charles Russell, who we talked around earlier in the Tyee, where documents demonstrated that David Beretta, Danielle Smith's husband, attended a government meeting about a $2.6 billion rail proposal. So Danielle Smith is bringing her husband into meetings that he has no business being in about massive infrastructure projects. And now she wants to pivot transit within the city of Calgary to trains. Now, Devin Dreeshen spoke just a couple of days later on the Alberta Update, the taxpayer-funded propaganda half hour produced every week or so. And he shared his thoughts about what happened and why it had to happen the way it did.
What's next? What will we see play out? And will we get a look at sort of new proposals here in the near future?
Yeah, so we, as a province, we love building LRT projects because obviously that relieves traffic for commuter traffic, for truck and car traffic. So we love to see transit projects work. We've been working with the City of Calgary on the Blue Line that'll eventually connect into the Calgary Airport. We've worked with the City of Edmonton on their LRT projects. But when it comes to the Green Line, our new engineering firm that we've contracted out will have a new alignment that will ideally stretch down to Shepherd and even to Seaton, to the South Calgary Health Campus, which again is going to see a big increase in the amount of riders for this transit system. So we're looking forward to it. We're still working with the City of Calgary, and I hope Calgarians, this new alignment is something that they'll be proud to see.
Now, again, we hear the Seaton piece come up, and that's an important piece because, again, there's potentially vested interests involved. A couple of city councillors in Calgary have raised concerns that one of the biggest people who has been saying, oh, this Green Line alignment that the city has going on, it's just not going to work, darn it, is somebody who's actually the board chair of one of the developers in Seaton. That gentleman's name is Jim Gray. And if those city councillors are correct, and Jim Gray is pushing for a cheaper, less effective version of the Green Line that services only South Calgary, because that way he'll get his company more money from the development that they're doing, then that certainly would be something that one would think should be made clear from the get-go. Which brings us to your province, your premier, yesterday.
To intend to take over the Green Line. There's been talk about proposed realignments along different stuff that have been dismissed as infeasible for many good reasons. And I worry this is because you want to build the line for as cheap as possible, and maybe there's influence from private companies such as Lyricon. So my question is, how can we trust that your government will build a Green Line alignment that will serve the needs of Calgarians as best as possible in the city for the next century, even if it isn't the cheapest option or doesn't align with the interests of private companies?
Well, look, we're going to talk with the city about what we do for a northern option, but I think we want to work on this together with them. I feel just in looking at the process, we've been disconnected from it, as has the federal funding partners, and even council has really delegated the oversight to an independent board, and things went a little off the rails, shall we say, because of that. So we would want a new governance structure where we can be making these decisions better. I mean, we have expertise on building large capital projects through transportation and economic corridors. We're in the middle of doing a review of how we would be able to build out an entire commuter rail system. And so my thinking is this, that Airdrie to Okotoks has a line that is currently fed by heavy rail. That's the kind of rail that CP uses. And we've begun our conversations with CP about whether we might be able to build a companion line on their right of way that would be dedicated to passenger service going all the way from Okotoks through the south, stopping in downtown, going north, stopping at the airport, and going on up to Airdrie. And that may be the way that we serve the south or the north if we're able to bring in a number of different feeder buses and park and rides. That may be a good option that's more cost effective. I don't want to rule that out as an option. But the first step is going to be a re-engineered look at how we can build the South Line all the way out to Seaton, which was what was promised to to Calgarians, and that was what we're working on doing. I hope we can get that far, because I think that would be a win for all three levels of government, and Calgarians in particular.
So you see how the goalposts have already moved. Just a few days prior, it was, well, maybe we can use the CP rail tracks to connect North Calgary to the downtown core. Now it's maybe we can use the CP rail tracks from North Calgary to Okotoks, which is pretty wild, because the implication there is that there would be development of a commuter rail network running from Okotoks to North Calgary to Airdrie, apparently, at the same time as a commuter LRT from the downtown core to Seaton. It's almost as if that would be, I don't know, duplicating the work. But there's some other things that we have to tease out of that little section there, because first of all, yes, it's good that there was an independent board assigned for the creation of that infrastructure. If you take a look at how the arena deal that Danielle Smith is so fond of is structured, there's an independent board for that. Because you can't have city councilors who don't have any experience and background in major infrastructure construction projects deciding that they're going to go in and, but what if we did this with the urinals or the hand washing stations? Hey, David Staples. What if we made these changes? You can't have that interference. So the independent board wasn't a bad thing. And again, as has been documented many times, I referenced this last week. If you haven't listened to the Sprawls episode on the Green Line, you really, really should, because the vast majority of the increase in costs came from the fact that the UCP under Kenny did exactly what the UCP under Danielle Smith is doing. They decided that they wanted to do a completely independent review. They delayed the project, and because they delayed the project, all sorts of costs went up. So, to be clear, the province of Alberta is doing the exact same thing that jacked up the prices on the Green Line that they did before. But that was just the first clip about the Green Line.
Were held with provincial officials over the years, to my understanding. Reportedly, no concerns raised. So, again, why pull the rug out from the project now, go back to the drawing board now on a new route and put the entire project at risk? If the province had concerns, why not issue them, raise them before funding was approved, which included the downtown tunnels?
You know, we did. We told them no initially. This is when Rick McIver initially looked at it, and he said, look, we can't do this if you're not going to connect in with the existing system. And so they came back with a proposal that was shorter, included the existing system. And we said, there's going to be cost overruns here. And they said, don't worry, we'll pay for all the cost overruns. All we'll ask you for is $1.5 billion. At which point Rick said, okay, if you're prepared to take the risk of a cost overrun, it's all yours. And then, 5 minutes later, when the cost overrun was materialized, they came back asking to share in our costs. So look, I mean, at some point, someone had to say, this is not a viable project the way it's being proposed. It was a 46-kilometer route that was initially proposed for about $4.5 billion. Now it's a little stub of a line, 9 kilometers that goes from nowhere to nowhere, $6.5 billion. If you look at the per kilometer basis, if it ever did get built out to 44 kilometers or 46 kilometers, it would be a $20 billion build. And I have to ask Calgarians, is that what you signed up for? Are you prepared to spend that amount of money on a single project because of the over-engineering that's required downtown? We don't think so. And so we think we can find a better way to do it.
Now, there's a whole lot of, grade A Danielle Smith condescension going on in that clip. It wasn't 5 minutes later. The oversimplification of, I don't know, 2 years of COVID and the review that Rick McIver forced on the project. If it was 5 minutes later, Kenny would still be premier. I don't think Danielle Smith would be happy with that. But there's a couple of other things that she does in there that are some pretty dirty communication tools. The first piece is she ignores all of the infrastructure build that has already been done. Again, we talked about this last week. We talked about the land that has been purchased and cleared. We talked about the tunnels that have been built. We talked about how existing projects like the Glenmore Trail expansion were done specifically with the Green Line in mind. So there's a lot of infrastructure pieces that have already been moved into place. She also seems to ignore that the most complicated part of the entire build is going to be the downtown core. There's no getting around that. So to try to say, oh, if you take a look at a per kilometer cost, this is going to be a $20 billion project. It's just going to go nuts. That is a level of hyperbole that is unnecessary, and it's profoundly misleading. And all too often, it is becoming exactly what people expect from the premier of the province. She's good at hyperbole. She's good at exaggeration. The problem is that she does it so consistently and so often. There are some people who believe her. There are people who don't take that step back and go, but wait a second, if the most complicated part of the Green Line is going to be building through the downtown core, and that's where all of the really, really technical challenges are going to happen, then once you get out of the downtown core into the area where the city's already procured and cleared a lot of land, things should go a whole lot easier. If you don't have people who aren't well versed enough in the project to say exactly what I just said there, then what Danielle Smith says sounds perfectly reasonable. But what she's doing is manipulating people's ignorance of the project in order to try to bolster her case, which is, to be clear, already been investigated. As many people have already pointed out, going up the Red Deer Valley not only is hopelessly ineffective because nobody lives there. So if you want to talk about building a commuter line to nowhere, Danny, going up the Red Deer Valley is a much more effective way of building a line to nowhere. Because one of the things that's critically important when it comes to people being able to access public transit is reducing the barriers to entry. And if you tell someone that the only way that they're going to be able to get on a train, a literal commuter train, not an LRT, but a literal commuter train that's somehow magically sharing lines with CP Rail, which also would have some fascinating jurisdictional issues, they got to go on a bus first, and then they got to go to another terminal, and then they got to go to the train place, and then they got to go to where they want to go. And maybe there's a stop in downtown. Maybe there's not a stop in between North Calgary and downtown. It gets all very confusing very, very quickly. But it doesn't work. It's been studied. This was part of the proposals that have been looked at on multiple occasions, and every single time it's come back, these are not effective options. But there's a little bit more, because remember how just a couple of days earlier, Danielle Smith was saying, well, we've committed to getting a company. Turns out they've already got a company.
Used in the past successfully is one that has given us an assessment on the Blue Line. We want to extend the Blue Line all the way to the airport. We've got sort of the next leg that we funded to 88th Avenue, but we want to have another avenue so that we can at least start building out that airport station. But they are going to take a look at this. And look, I mean, I share Calgarians' aspiration. It'd be wonderful to have a northern leg of our LRT system that goes up to 160th, as well as a southern leg that goes goes down to Seton. The question is, does it all have to be one line? Can you have a different terminal point? Look at them as two separate projects. That's what we're asking. We're saying, if we started where the event center is going to be and a downtown Union Station that gathers everybody in one place so that they can go on to the other lines, how far south could we go? Could we go to Shepherd, or could we even go to Seton? And then let's have another conversation about an alignment if we were to go north.
And this is where the communications crafting is really starting to shine through, because what Danielle Smith wants to see is not a contiguous line that goes all the way from North Calgary to South Calgary. That's not what she wants. What she really, really wants is that Grand Central Station. She wants that Union Station where you can have the mixing of all of the different lines and that train to Banff. So what Danielle Smith appears to be doing, it wouldn't be unreasonable to speculate that what Danielle Smith is doing is, in order to make sure that her buddy Jim Gray gets his line down to Seton, and in order to make sure that the Lyricon Capital folks who are pushing for the project of running a commuter train out to Banff get what they want, the entire central point has to be that Grand Union Station. Because without that Grand Union Station, without that, all of a sudden the Banff Trail falls apart. The Banff train falls apart real fast. And it's worth noting that Lyricon Capital has been pursuing that train to Banff for quite a while now. It's also worth remembering that it was looked at by the former UCP government. And the minister at the time, Prasad Panda, said there is no business case for this. And they rejected the project. So Danielle Smith, despite her own government's assessment that the train to Banff did not have a business case, is pulling the rotting corpse of that line out of the grave, and she's throwing it on top of the green line because that's what she wants. But I mentioned Jim Gray. I'm speculating. It's not like Danielle Smith has been following Jim Gray. It's not like he's had any sort of undue influence potentially on her decisions, right? That's just speculative, right?
Alone Stollery in Edmonton. And that's vitally important, because to get kids care, Jim Gray and that Green Line group that he's put together, they had hired their own engineers, saying that there was no way it was ever going to be built for $4.4 billion. And I've been watching their work for some time. And so when it got to a point where clearly the costs were escalating and we aren't going to see an end in sight, I just thought, you know what, we've got to regroup and rethink this. The approach I would like to take in future for these mega projects is, I would like to see, if we're going to have three parties funding it, then maybe three parties need to be at the table for oversight, because then we can troubleshoot along the way. I seem to recall back in the Dave Brown-Kanye era, someone told me that in the construction of the West Leg, he was meeting every single week with the project leads on that, troubleshooting along the way, making sure that there was direct oversight from his office. And you may have to have him on to give his opinions if he's willing to give them. But that to me is the kind of the direction I want to go on a lot of our infrastructure. Is I just, frankly, it's sort of trust but verify. You want to make sure that the experts are able to do the work and the engineering, but if there are things that we can modify along the way, I think we need to have that better political oversight. So we'll be looking at seeing if we can develop a new approach once we get the report back on the south leg of the Green Line LRT, but I'd be looking to be quite a bit more involved than we were in the past.
So let's be clear. She has been following the work of Jim Gray. It has influenced her decision-making process. As the good folks at City Council have already pointed out, there's maybe a little bit of a bias there that could be a little bit problematic. But there's also some other pieces that are really problematic in there, because what Danielle Smith, there's two pieces that appears Danielle Smith can't quite wrap her head around. The first one is doing a light rail transit line from the center of Calgary to the deep south is a lot more complicated than, I don't know, getting your kitchen redone or doing a new addition to the house. Yes, in those projects, maybe you decide you want to change the cabinet color. Maybe you decide you want to go with a nice granite countertop. There's lots of little options that you can change along the way. But when you're talking about an infrastructure project, the size that we're talking about, there's no real room for politicians to come in and go, well, what if we did this? Well, what if we did this? And this is one of the fundamental problems that Danielle Smith has demonstrated that she possesses over and over and over again. She has a deep unwillingness to listen to the experts, because if she thinks she knows better, then that's the ballgame. And that's really unfortunate, because there's nothing wrong with recognizing expertise where it exists and letting the experts do those things. But the question came up as well, why is it that we are funding, as taxpayers across the province, by the way, so this isn't just Calgarians who are funding the arena deal, why is it that the money exists for the province, taxpayers across Alberta, to pay for the arena deal, but there's no money for the Green Line? And it's in this clip that Danielle Smith really demonstrates how little she understands about what public transit is and why it's so important.
Green Line, while you do have money for the corporate welfare handout for the Flames.
A couple of things then. So first of all, with the with building roads, I 100% agree. It's why we completed the ring road on time, actually a year early and on budget. And so that gives an alternative route for Calgarians and those coming to Calgary all around. Edmonton had been completed for some time, so that's one route. We also know that the Deerfoot is one of their major thoroughfares through Calgary, and it needs to be upgraded. So I think we're in the process of renovating and redoing over a dozen bridges and 5 interchanges. And so, yes, we absolutely also need to improve that thoroughfare. When it comes to, look, the City of Calgary asked us to assist them in gentrifying downtown. And one of the initial proposals they came up with was that they wanted us to spend $200 million to help renovate condo conversions that would, in our view, benefit private companies. And we didn't think that was the right way to go. But when they came back and said, hey, could you bridge the gap on this deal that we've signed and want to sign with the event center, where you build the road infrastructure to be able to get people going in and out. You help us build the LRT station there. You build a community facility that people can use. You bulldoze the Saddle Dome. We thought, okay, well, if we can pay for the infrastructure to support this project, we're prepared to do that. And we've limited our amount. It's $300 million that we're putting for the infrastructure improvements, $30 million for the community arena. And I think that that's the kind of example of how we can play a role in using public dollars to benefit the public as a whole to see some of these big projects go through.
See, the whole point of public transit is you're supposed to try to get cars off the roads. You're supposed to be able to make transportation available to people who can't afford maybe a car, who can't afford maybe all of the gas that it takes to drive around those ring roads. So you can improve those roads all that you want, but it doesn't do anything to help the people who need to and want to access public transit. And it's really unfortunate that the emphasis is on the roads. Because the reality is, yes, Alberta is growing in population. There's no question about that. The province of Alberta did the whole Alberta is calling program to try to get more people to move to Alberta. And that is going to mean that more people need to move around. So the question, the responsible question, one would think, would be, what is the best way to move the most amount of people around efficiently? And the research has been done. It's not cars. So if the government of Alberta was legitimately interested in investing in the transportation infrastructure for the city of Calgary, they would be looking at making sure that there is a well-researched, well-thought-out transit system that is going to serve Calgarians, not the people who are building the arena. and not the people who are building new developments in the south of Calgary. And this is where the your province, your premier piece gets to be so incredibly frustrating, because Danielle Smith was asked about healthcare. And in this short clip, she demonstrates that she almost gets it, or worse, that she does, when it comes to the importance of having an integrated healthcare system.
Standalone stollery in Edmonton. And that's vitally important, because to get kids care all in one place is going to be able to deliver, I think, better experience for the patients and the staff.
Kids care all in one place is going to be able to deliver a better experience for both the patients and the staff. And on this, I find myself shockingly agreeing wholeheartedly with Danielle Smith, because on this, she's absolutely correct. Having an integrated system where people are able to access all of the different healthcare services that they need in one place reduces barriers. It creates infinitely better health outcomes. It creates infinitely better work environments for the people who are delivering that healthcare. Danielle Smith recognizes that that's the best type of environment for kids, all at the same time while she's dismantling the integrated healthcare system that was the envy of the world for no discernible reason other than she wants to. And this is where the questions really start to have to be asked about what are her motivations for doing that. Because if Danielle Smith recognizes that an integrated healthcare system results in better outcomes for everyone, why is she dismantling the public healthcare system that is Alberta Health Services, if for no other reason than to bring in more private, profitized providers? Because it's always about the money. She's doing it in Airdrie Urgent Care, where the government of Alberta put forward $85,000 and asked a group of doctors to put together a proposal for a private, for-profit urgent care. She's doing it in hospitals in rural Alberta, where she has already begun the process of flipping an AHS hospital over to Covenant Care. There's not a whole lot yet of money to be made when it comes to kids. But when it comes to the drug addicts, well, nobody really cares about them, right? Those people, those we can profitize. But there's other groups that Danielle Smith is entirely comfortable punching down on, because she was asked about her shared values comment.
You're taking heat over that.
Well, I don't think that I should. I talk about shared values all the time.
Well,
I talk about how we're built on the basis of freedom and family and community and free enterprise and philanthropy.
You
and
said
faith.
you continue to welcome newcomers who possess our shared values, and some
100%.
people see that as
People should come to our province for a couple of reasons. One, they want to work and they want to contribute to everything that makes Alberta great. And number two, we believe that people who come to our country want to leave the conflicts of their home country behind so that they can build a new life here. That shouldn't be something that is unusual. That's something that we actually embrace as a country. That's the reason why we have such support for a high level of newcomers here. And I think it's the reason why we have a lot of peace in Alberta, is because we do have those shared values. They're enshrined in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. They're enshrined in our Alberta Bill of Rights. It is the culture of Alberta, and I'm pretty proud of that.
Now, again, there's some problems there. People should only come to Alberta if they want to work and contribute to the great society that is Alberta. And that they should leave the conflicts that they're fleeing behind. That acknowledges kind of that there's a lot of different reasons for people A, to leave their countries, and B, to come to Alberta, which, to be clear, can be two entirely separate motivations. And this is where the refugee piece gets to be so appalling. Because there are people who are fleeing countries, the circumstances of which are horrifying. And they're not able to bring their families back with them. They're not able to bring their families to Canada with them immediately. There are people who undergo racial persecution, religious persecution, sexual persecution. There's a whole list of things that people in other countries, in other parts of the world, can be persecuted and killed for. And some of those things affect their entire families. There are countries whose economies are dependent on people who come to countries like Canada, provinces like Alberta, to earn money, to send money back to their home countries so they can get more people out of those conflicts. And to say that you should come to a country like Canada and a province like Alberta and just forget it all. Forget those family members who are still suffering, whether it's under oppression or under poverty. You should just forget those people and move on, is unbelievably cold-hearted. It also ignores the fact that there are people who come to Canada and Alberta as refugees who do so, and they can't just leave the trauma of what they experienced in their countries of origin behind. That trauma has become a part of them. And this is one of the reasons that international laws about accepting refugees exist. Because some people experience so much trauma that it's going to take them years to extricate themselves from it. And if there is a failure that exists, it is that we as a country have not done a sufficient job to make sure that the refugees that come to our borders are getting the care that they need. And it's going to be even harder to do in a healthcare system that is being ripped apart by somebody who's doing so only for personal vendetta and private gain. And if it seems like I'm hitting the refugee part a little bit hard, it's because Danielle Smith hit it way harder.
And in a statement this week, you said, we simply cannot afford it. But doesn't that fly in the face of the Alberta is Calling campaign to attract more workers here, and a letter to the Prime Minister back in March asking to allow for 10,000 more allocations for Ukraine evacuees?
Let me tell you the difference. The difference is that if you have an employer who has hired a worker and needs a pathway to get them in as a temporary foreign worker on a pathway to permanent immigration, that's a different pathway. Of course, we want to enable that because that helps our job economy. It allows them to have an income right away to support themselves. It allows them to be able to pay taxes right away. That is the perfect way in which immigration should work. That's why we've been asking to take more control so that we can have more economic immigrants come connected to the jobs we have available. Let me tell you what the federal strategy is that when somebody arrives at the airport and does a refugee claim, they clear CBSA, they get put in a cab, and they get taken to the navigation center in downtown Calgary and downtown Edmonton. And then all of the costs are on us. They don't have a job to go to. They don't have a network to help them. They don't have the ability to get a home. They're living in shelter spaces. That is not an optimal approach. And that is quite literally what is happening. Because in the past, there used to be somewhere around 3,000 or 4,000 people who would come in through our ports of entry at airports. Last year, it was 41,000. This year, it's already 31,000 to the end of July. We're on track to see 60,000 people come through the airport. That is the most secure way for the federal government to be guarding our borders. They can tell people, no, to get on a plane, you have to have a visa. You have to have a legitimate reason to come there. They have thrown open the borders, and they're putting the costs on the provinces to manage the cost of that. It's driving up the cost of housing. There isn't appropriate spaces for anyone. There isn't an easy pathway to get them self-sufficient, and we just can't afford it. We're at a point now where we did welcome 70,000 Ukrainian evacuees in 2022, 2023. I'm amazed and astounded by the outpouring of support from the Ukrainian diaspora community, because that was almost a seamless integration into Alberta. But the way they're doing it now, with just random people showing up at the airport and then being dumped on the drop-in center, that's not fair to anyone. It's not fair to the person who's coming to our country, and it's certainly not fair to the citizens of the two big cities that are receiving them.
And it's also not happening. Certainly not on the scale that Danielle Smith is talking about there. That is unadulterated fiction. And it is absolutely appalling that the Premier of Alberta is going to misrepresent the situation with refugees coming into the country so ludicrously. And we're going to break down just how ludicrous some of what she has said is. But all you need to do, if you want confirmation of what Danielle Smith says, is go to the federal website for refugees, the Government of Canada website that deals with refugees. And it's very, very clear. When you come to Canada and you claim refugee status, the CBSA evaluates whether or not there is a need for you to make a claim. That's the first filter that happens. Not all claims are accepted immediately. And if you do make a claim, there's still the whole hearing process that has to happen. But in the interim, if you don't have social supports, if you don't have medical needs, or if you have medical needs that need to be met, there are a variety of federal programs that provide health care, that do provide social supports. So it's incredibly disingenuous and dishonest for Danielle Smith to make the claim that every single person who comes to the Calgary airport and makes a refugee claim, they just get processed, thrown in a cab, taken down to the DI. That's simply not what happens. It's simply not true. And the costs don't entirely get handed off to the Alberta government, because there are federal programs. We talked about this when we talked about Danielle Smith's dental care plan and her objections to the federal dental care plan, because refugees have access to a federal program that provides health care and dental care. So she's just lying. And she's manipulating numbers in a really, really gross way. Because if you take a look at the actual numbers for the number of people who are accessing refugee claims through different ports of entry, you have to really take a look at the different types that we're talking about. So, yes, for the entire country, there are, as of the end of July, 31,435 people who have come through airports and said, I cannot go back to my home country because they're going to kill me or they're going to hurt me. Please help. Which is, again, an international law issue. How many of those people, how many of those 31,435 that Danielle Smith talked about there, how many of those are actually coming to Alberta? 380. That's it. She's using national numbers. And she's not making it clear that she's using national numbers. And she's doing so in the way that she does it is a dog whistle. And it's irresponsible, because people listening to that program, you heard the clip, they would be entirely justified to think to themselves, my God, there's 31,000 refugees coming to Alberta. And when you take a look at what the actual breakdown for the numbers are for land ports of entry, 215. So when we're talking about how many people through all ports of entry have made refugee claims in Alberta this year, you are talking about a total of 595. 595. That's it. But Danielle Smith is willing to throw around numbers like 60,000. She's willing to make it sound like Alberta has had 30,000 people come into the province so far. No, it is 595. That's it. Through all ports of entry, 595 people in the province of Alberta have claimed refugee status. Period. End of sentence for this year. And where it gets really telling is if you take a look at the numbers year over year, which you'd better believe we did. Because if you take a look, from January to July in 2023, last year, Canada accepted 40,135 people claiming refugee status. That is for the entire country. No, but we're on track for so many more this year. It's going through the roof. Well, that's probably because she's talking about the fact that the airport numbers haven't really changed, but the ground numbers have. The land ports of entry in 2023 for the whole year were 29,455. For this year, 9,240. But let's compare apples to apples. From January to July in 2023, Canada accepted 40,135 people claiming refugee status. For 2024 so far, 41,435. Canada is on track to accept almost the exact same number of refugees that we accepted last year. There is an increase for the entire country of 1,300 more, which again, taken in the context of the fact that Alberta has only taken in 595. They're not flooding through our airports. They're not flooding through our borders. It's racist dog whistling. It's xenophobic. That's all that it is. And it's horrifying that Danielle Smith, as the Premier of Alberta, who is afraid only for her leadership review, it appears, is willing to put the safety of not just the 595 people who came to Alberta trying to escape whatever it was that they're trying to escape at risk. But as we have seen with hate crimes in this province time and time again, and as we have seen in the threads and the comments in the threads on all of the social media platforms, people do not do a very good job of differentiating past skin color. We saw this out of 9/11, where 6 members of the Sikh faith, people who had nothing to do with Islam, were targeted and beaten. Were the targets of violence and hate language. This is a reality. And it's a reality that has persisted in this province. And for Danielle Smith to stand up on her radio platform and misrepresent these issues so grossly is unbelievably irresponsible. And the tragedy of it is it's that kind of rhetoric that leads to the kinds of environments that many of these people are trying to escape from. The metric of whether or not we allow people to immigrate to Alberta should not be, yeah, but can we make money from them? Do they have jobs guaranteed? Can we make money from them? That should not be the only metric. Because if we've become a province that has become so economically driven only that we are able to turn our eyes away from genuine suffering, that we have the ability to help, that is more of a reflection of the shared values that Danielle Smith talks about. The healthcare system is in crisis. There's no question about that. It's not being helped by people like Tyler Shandro starting wars with physicians and driving physicians out of the province. It's not being helped by people like Danielle Smith ripping the healthcare system apart when she on some level knows that what she's doing is creating more problems. If you want to take a look at the major flaws in our systems, whether we're talking about education or whether we're talking about healthcare, it is not the immigrants. That is a lazy trope. We have underfunded these institutions that should be cathedrals for the people who live in this province for decades. That's where the problem lies. Rather than addressing the actual problems that exist in healthcare, we have politicians who pursue policies that generate more instability and more harm. And to blame it, turn around and blame it then on immigrants and refugees no less, is the laziest and grossest type of politics that I can, quite frankly, imagine. All of that being said, another one of those breakdown hard pivots. We got one little correction that we got issued from last week's show because we talked about Danielle Smith and the fact that she made a lot of promises, ironically, to the Muslim population, many of whom in the room that she made the promises to were new Canadians, new Albertans. She made promises. She promised that she would make sure that there were Muslim holidays, Islamic holidays, would be recognized by the province of Alberta, and that people would be able to take the day off with pay in order to recognize their religious holidays. She hasn't delivered on that. She made a bunch of promises in regards to bringing in halal mortgages and the Sharia law within institutions to support them, and she hasn't done that. There's a lot of argument. We made the argument that she probably hasn't done it in the way that she said because she doesn't need to, because there are halal companies that exist. One of those companies, we used some old information on last week's show. We said that every single mortgages were signed by the Al Rashid Mosque. They actually have an overriding agreement, a fatwa or a religious law declaration from the Al-Azhar. So the Al-Azhar Fatwa Committee has taken a look at how that organization does business, and they've said, yeah, no, they're good. They're covered. So we were using old information when we said that every single mortgage was looked at by the Al Rashid Mosque. That's how it started. They now have this decree from the Al-Azhar committee. And so there's that. Our bad. Sorry. Moving on from there, and we're going to open it up to the open mic segment in a section here. So if you have something to say about anything that we talked about on the show tonight, then you can jump in on the Twitter Spaces, and you can raise your hand over there and share your thoughts. But before we get to that part, I'm going to do the obligatory plugs. We're going to figure out the camera problem for next week's show, because we got a couple things that we're really looking forward to talking to about next week's show, because we got a FOIP back. That's a spicy little FOIP it is. But in order to explain it, we need a chunk of time. So hopefully this week in politics will be boring so that we can dedicate 20 minutes next week to putting that whole thing in the appropriate context. But this is where we do the plug and the thank yous, because we're able to do the FOIPs that we do and get the new pieces of tech that inevitably take 2 or 3 iterations to figure out because of the support that we get from our Patreon sponsors. So if you appreciate the kind of content that we're trying to produce here, you can sign up to be one of our Patreon supporters at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab, where you can do the small monthly subscription that helps us do what we do. Alternatively, if you're not into the long-term commitments, then we do also have the ability to accept e-transfers now. You can send those to info@thebreakdownab.ca, because they let us get the cameras that come with a learning curve and file all of the FOIPs that we do. And we have a couple other FOIP irons in the fire that we're looking forward to getting back that will cause, I'm sure, some consternation from some folks in some powerful positions. But yeah, that's the financial plugs and stuffs. All of that being said, gonna open it up to the floor here, and one of our regular speakers is already waiting in the queue. We've got Tammy waiting in there tonight. How's it going, Tammy?
Hey, how's it going? Why is it always me? Everyone else should talk too, but I'm
very intimidating.
Yeah. You hit some of my hot buttons again. So, and this, you guys have to understand. I only lived when I was a kid, and we still own the farm, the land out there. Our house burnt down. It's only 30 minutes, half an hour drive at 100 kilometers an hour west of Edmonton. And Edmonton is arguably the most left-leaning place in Alberta, arguably. Like, I'll take that there are other areas that are turning more left-leaning, but Edmonton has always kind of been the stronghold. Now, here's my issue. 30 miles. That's not that long. Like, that's literally not far. You know the thing about I have a theory. The only difference between Danielle Smith and Trump is that she's a better communicator.
I don't think you're wrong. I don't think you're wrong at all. I've said many times, I mean, you've heard me say it, I'm sure, many times on the show, that her communication skills and how she shapes her communication message should not be underestimated. It is infuriating, but it's very well executed.
She is so racist, and she panders to the most racist crap in Alberta. When I was out 30 miles west, and this is the thing that annoys me. So my dad was a truck driver for at least part of his life, because he worked at a place called Combustion Engineering, which was the big outfit that did all of the power plants. So the problem with power plants is they go into a shutdown, and then they bring in people from the union to do the jobs. But then, at the end of the job, you go out of work, you go on a pogey, because there's no work at that point in time. And because it's a union, and I don't hold anything bad about unions, in this particular case, there are unions that have issues. But in this case, the way a union system works is then you go to the bottom of the line for the next job. So you've worked a job, you go to the bottom of the line. Now, when there's only 3 plants, like 3 in your area, if you go to the bottom of the line, that could mean that you won't see work not just until the next shutdown. That could mean you might be down, you might not get pulled for the next shutdown. So you might not get work again for a full year. because just the way things go, that can happen. So as my dad's side gig, he was a truck driver. So I was introduced to trucker culture. And we all know about the trucker culture that went up to Ottawa to throw a big fight. Here's the thing. Trucker culture is amazingly racist. So one of the things, the tropes that I heard as a kid, and actually as an adult, because we were still around truckers all the time, was they would, and I'm going to, we'll call it sanitize the words, because I heard the nasty racist words.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that East Indian people would hire a big rig or would buy a big rig together as part of their family group. And instead of just one person driving that rig, that single rig, there would be two guys. One would sleep in the sleeper cab while the other one drove. And they would urinate in a bucket in the rig so that they could continue driving. And you heard all of the racist crap about how the rig would smell of their spices. And these, like, just horrible things, all because they want to get turnover and make all the money, right? And it's like, so basically what you're saying is because they have a stronger work ethic and they have a method to do the work in a way that you're not being forced. I mean, they're still being forced. They're still complying to the requirements of the job, of taking time off, of tracking all their hours. But because they have literally a way to work around or work through the system, they would say work around the system, the racist folk, they are working within the system to get the job done, right? They would hate these people. And I don't even know that half of the crap that we're reading about, all of that kind of stuff, was true. They probably weren't.
Yeah.
But that is the toxic. And this is the same stuff, and I'm sorry, you know my addiction to American media and American news. This is the same crap that we see Trump pushing about folks, and I can't remember which ethnic group, the people that had come, they came legally, right? They got admission from the US. They came legally. They were brought there because the bloody Springfield was basically going dead.
Well, I mean, the Springfield thing, I'm going to jump in there because I got a couple things I got to say real quick.
Sure.
The Springfield thing it was false.
I know.
That whole thing was
crap.
Yeah. I mean, the woman who allegedly ate the cat, she was an American born in the United States. She
Absolutely.
also suffered from severe mental health issues. So the fact that people suffering from mental health issues sometimes do horrifying things should not be shocking to anybody.
No.
But the other thing that I just want to hop in with real quick, because you got our chat going over here, and I want to acknowledge it, is there. I think that in every low barrier to entry profession, I'll say, you're going to see a mix of people, and I think you're going to see more extremes because the barriers to entry in some professions are lower, And I think that because those barrier to entries are lower, to get into that profession, you do tend to see the extremes. But I think it's really important to highlight that when we're talking about the trucker culture, I mean, trucker culture in Alberta, Canada, 30 years ago was very different than it is now. And B, one of the things that I took away from the convoy is there were a lot of people there who are not long haul truckers. There were a lot of people there who were tourists. And the reality is that the convoy did not in any, I mean, there were a lot of people at Coutts, for goodness sakes, who were pissed off with good reason at the Coutts insurrectionists, because they were just trying to do their job and move product back and forth across the border. And this extremist element within that profession decided that they were going to try to say that they represent all truckers. And I just want to make it really, really clear that in any profession, but particularly the low barrier to entry ones, you're going to see some really, really amazing people as much as you're going to see the really horrifying ones. And so I just wanted to throw that in there.
That's fair. And I agree. I'm talking about understand, like my dad was a trucker and he was one of the good guys.
Yeah.
But the thing was he had to bite his tongue, right? When you're in a room with a bunch of guys that are spouting crap, as good as my dad was at throwing fists, he's not gonna, there's a certain amount of, you gotta kind of protect your job. It's just like it was with me when I was working in the oil and gas field as a computer geek, because even though I disagreed with it, it was a job, right? And I would get in arguments with my manager because she was a typical Albertan, oil is great, Catholic, great, all of the things that I detest. So we would reasonably discuss, and we would never agree. We'd have to agree to disagree, because there was no way. Even though we were having the conversations, there was no, right? I'm a lefty, she was an extreme right. And it frustrated me to no end. And I will say this, because Catholicism, you're supposed to, this is my issue with Christianity and why I didn't end up being Christian or Catholic, because there's this idea of, we take care of the least among us. And yet everything I would see, they didn't, right? They would do it. I always said, for one day out of the year during Christmas, they provide food and, they do all the things they're supposed to do. The other 364 days of the year, they don't give a beep. And I know that's not all Catholics and it's not all Christians, but there seems to be maybe a really vocal minority, or is it really that is the majority and it's the minority that are doing,
I think I like to tell myself
the tenets of their own religion.
I like to tell myself that it's almost always a vocal minority. And the reason why I say that is because, as you said yourself there, it is when you have people who are doing a very good job of being that vocal minority, especially when they're expressing bigoted views, it can be intimidating and challenging to say, oh, I think you might be full of shit, and here's why. That's something that a lot of people, especially in a professional environment, aren't necessarily as comfortable as some others would do. So I really do think, like, I know some wonderful people who are Christians. I know some, I know wonderful people who are parts of everything. I also know some absolute dicks who are part of everything. And I think that the challenge is that because the vocal minority is so good at being so offensive and so loud, so always, that it makes it very difficult unless you're hardwired to
like me, to be a mouth.
Yeah, exactly.
My dad was always the one that would keep his mouth shut. He used to say about, and I take after my mom, obviously, but he used to say about my mom, don't piss off, excuse my language, Jean. He had literally seen her see someone that had angered her, and he would literally go to the other side of the street and watch. If he didn't like the person that he knew my mom was going to take on, he'd watch from the other side of the street. But he knew he didn't need to protect her. He just needed to get out of her way.
There we go.
It's like, but yeah, I'm watching the stuff that's going on, and I'm like, and it's almost down to the point of that idea of, how they call it, that she calls it the Alberta Bill of Rights. She's totally telegraphing her allegiance with the U.S.
Yep, 100%. We got Cassandra waiting in the queue. Is there any other big points you wanted to hit on?
Nope. You go back to Cassandra. You have a great night.
Well, thank you. You have a great night as well, Tammy. Thanks for tapping in.
All right.
Cassandra, how are you doing tonight? Ruh-roh.
Oh, there we go.
There
Sorry.
we go.
I accidentally almost shut us down there. So I wasn't going to speak on this. I just want to say I come from a family of truck drivers, and I know a lot of truck drivers. Even now, my brother was a truck driver. My dad, my uncles, they're all Teamsters. The whole convoy thing, I could hear my dad in my ear screaming blue murder. He's gone. I could hear him screaming from the grave blue murder at those guys, because I know he wouldn't. Anyway, I think it is. I know it's a vocal minority, because I know a lot of truck drivers and none of them feel that way. But that's not what I want to talk about. I was going to say, like, in regards to two things, we'll start with the whole Green Line debacle. The Green Line, this is the silly thing. So there's this line, it's called the Red Line. It goes from Tuscany all the way down to Somerset. And I used to live right by it in Somerset. And I remember asking, because I was looking down the track, it looked like it was trying to go somewhere, but the train just ended there. And I asked somebody about it one day, and they were like, oh yeah, because there's plans to extend it further south. It already, if it goes to Somerset, that's past 162nd Street or Avenue in the south, and there's already plans to make it go that way. You could very easily make that extension from Somerset on the Red Line go down to Okotoks. Even you could probably twin it and veer it off and make it go to Seaton too. So really, it goes from Tuscany and it goes through the downtown core.
Yep.
And then goes on past the Saddle Dome down to all the way down to Somerset. And it was designed to be extended further south, and it could very easily, and would be a lot cheaper than whatever nonsense Danielle was talking about. Like, she just, I don't know. I keep hearing certain people have said she's smart. She's not smart, because if she was smart, she wouldn't say such ridiculous crap when we've already got things going. Like Somerset, the Red Line easily goes to Seaton, Okotoks if you want. Not a big deal. It's already been in the plans. So I don't know why you would want to restructure the Green Line. That was a completely separate line. It not to mention the cost. I mean, if you've already got things in the ground and you've already spent all this money on it, and one of the big reasons, aside from inflation and a bunch of other things, that it is delays. It's been provincial government imposed delays on this project. that have made the costs balloon. And this is just going to make them balloon. This isn't going to save us money. This is going to make them balloon further because now you're restructuring and rerouting something that's already started to be built. So that's what I have to say. Danielle needs to, I don't know what she's on. If she's on drugs, I don't know. But I can't help but think that maybe if she wants to do forced rehab, maybe the first person we should be forcing is her, because there's got to be the only explanation I can think for the most nonsensical crap that comes out of her mouth. I just can't think of anything else.
Pride, ego.
What? Yeah. Well, because I won't go on. You're baiting me now. I'm going to say something I don't want to. I mean, that's the thing. And I think there's been all kinds of discussions about the train and the Green Line lately. And I think that's the one thing that everybody keeps missing is that, oh, the red line, we have a line going to the Deep South that could be extended and had plans to be extended at some point. The immigration bit really just, I'd like to say I'm at a loss for words, but in fact, I have so many, I'm trying to figure out where to start. I think what irritates me the most is, this is a province, entire country, but a province also built on immigration. My family was one of those families. We're one of the early families when Alberta first became a province of its own, independent of the Northwest Territories. My family immigrated to Canada. They were fleeing Germany in the 1920s when, Hitler was on the rise there, and awful things were happening, and there was deep poverty and war, and they were like, we got to get the hell out of here with our kids and our family, and they came to Canada specifically, but then got their homestead in Alberta. It was given to them by the government to farm and produce, and they did. And Danielle Smith's family came from the US. They weren't fleeing persecution. They were opportunists coming from the States up to Canada. And that's the fact. And maybe that's why she doesn't get the whole thing. Maybe that's why she's confused, because she still seems to, maybe that's why she's confused about, the difference between the powers of a premier versus a governor. I don't know, but she needs to stop. And if she really wants to live in that kind of system, maybe she should just go back to her roots in Kansas or Oklahoma or wherever the hell it was and stop. And I'm sorry, I'm just frustrated with this. This is, there's so many immigrants from all over the world that have been here since the beginning, since the birth of Alberta as a province, and to sit there and make such shared values. I don't feel like Danielle Smith shares Alberta values. Right? If you want to get down to what shared Alberta values are, she doesn't share any of them, because everything she does goes against the majority of the population of Alberta and what we want.
Well, and she lies.
We want, we want to stay in the CPP. It belongs to me. It doesn't belong to her. It doesn't belong to anybody else. My CPP is something I invested in from my paycheck as an individual, not as a group. And she needs to keep her filthy paws off of it. And 88% of Albertans agree with me, and she needs to start listening to that majority, because maybe she can save her butt in her leadership review, but she's not going to be around for long. I told Jason Kenney at the beginning of his reign, I called him up and we had a couple email conversations, and I told him, I said, if you mess with healthcare and education, just look at the history of other premiers who have sought to do the same. They don't have political careers anymore. That's where you're going. And, he didn't listen. And guess what? Where's his political career? It's dead. And And Danielle Smith, this is my prediction, is that the fate of Danielle Smith's political career is going to go beyond what happened to Kenny, because of all my friends, including my conservative friends, I maybe know only one, that actually supports her.
Yeah.
None of my other friends, including my conservative friends, support anything she does. Everybody's ticked off. Everybody wants her to just stop. Stop, just stop. And anyway, that's as you can see, I'm clearly frustrated, and
I think you got good reason to be
I'm biting my
frustrated.
tongue in everything I say. But I just, yeah.
Well, as you were talking there, you clicked something in place for me that I want to riff on for just a sec, because I think it speaks to the fact that, again, Tammy and I did a little bit of back and forth about Danielle Smith communication skills, and the problem that I think exists with Danielle Smith is she is such an incredibly strong communicator, and she is so entirely willing to lie. And she's so entirely willing to weaponize issues that should not be weaponized. And as you were talking about her family coming up from the States, I go back to one of Danielle Smith's great scandals in October of 2022. I'm reading off of Wikipedia right now. She claimed her paternal, so on her dad's side, great-grandfather, was Philippus Klodnicki, whose name was anglicized to Philip Smith upon arriving in Canada in October 2022. She claimed Klodnicki. I'm bad at Ukrainian names. After the First World War, which ended in 1918, to escape communism. She said her political beliefs were largely born out of a complete distrust of socialism, from which her great-grandfather fled. So she has painted the story that her family history is steeped in being a refugee from a dictatorial regime. Now, in true Danielle Smith fashion, that was all entirely debunked, and it turns out that he came to Canada before the First World War or the 1917 October Revolution in 1913. So she lied about that too. Hooray! But the fact that she has, again, an awareness of, like, you don't invoke something unless you think it's going to get you something. So if you say, hey, my family comes from a refugee background too, guys, I get what it's like to feel oppressed, and that's why I've taken the political positions that I have. If you're willing to invoke that, it's because you know that there's a strong emotional reaction that most people are going to have to that. And the fact that she's willing to lean into that to score political points, but at the same time, when she needs to survive her leadership review, throw immigrants and refugees under the bus, that speaks to the character. And the other thing that I just want to add on the back of what you said there as well is, if there is, for me, as somebody who's lived in both rural Alberta and urban Alberta, if there is a shared value, especially in rural Alberta, that exists, it's that you take care of community and you tell the truth.
Absolutely. I mean, my family comes from rural Alberta, like on my father's side. They fled. I mean, to be honest, like my grandparents came here and stuff, but a lot of our family in Germany was divided, and some of them did live under communist rule because they were so-called liberated by the Soviet Union, and we were divided by the wall. The family was divided by the wall. So, I've gotten lots of stories from my family. One of my cousins, he lives in Spain now. He was born in Stolp. And, he agrees with everything that we talk about. Like he 100% agrees, and he actually sought out and found some of our family in the last few years that was on the east side of the wall, and brought them together. And there's even more stories. I mean, you're right, it does stoke strong emotion, but I think, given if you look at the makeup of Alberta and where a lot of people in Alberta came from, especially, in the early days when we became our own province, a lot of us came from countries like the Soviet Union and Germany and Poland and Ukraine and places that were torn apart by World War I and World War II and I think the strong emotion is the rejection of everything she says, because it just sounds, if you come from any of those places or your family does, you can't help but reject everything she says, because it's just so delusional. And anyway, that's all I have to say.
Well, thank you so much for tapping in. It's nice to hear your voice again. It's been a little while, and even a couple people in the chat were like, "Oh, I'm so glad she's doing okay." So
yeah, I'm doing good.
Awesome.
Plug it along.
Perfect. Well, thanks again for tapping in there. And with that, we're going to call this the end of the episode, because we're getting dangerously close to Lord of the Rings territory again. Probably going to break this into 2 parts for the audio. I have to do some editing to clean up the camera failure anyways, so we'll do that too. I want to say a big thank you to everybody who was listening live or watching live tonight. I want to say a huge thank you to the chat. I love the back and forth and the little microcosm that goes on over there, and I love the fact that every once in a while somebody throws something in there to make sure that they're holding me accountable. So thank you for everything you're doing, chat. Love you. I want to say a big thank you to everybody who's in on the spaces, especially our 2 speakers. Good to have Tammy and Cassandra both back. And again, big thanks to the Patreon supporters. If you enjoyed this episode, if you're listening to the audio version, leave a review. Do the rating thing with the stars, because there's every once in a while somebody says mean things about us, and it apparently hurts how many ears we get into or something. I'm not entirely sure how it works. I'm not that bright, but if you leave a review, that helps. And if you're watching on the YouTubes, if you're watching live or if you're watching it after the fact, then thank you for sitting through 2.5 hours of our content. But also make sure that you hit the like, subscribe, share with your friends. So I'll alienate your families for you. You don't have to do I'm tired and getting punchy. So we're going to wrap it up there. I am going to, though, keep the tradition going that we stepped away from, but we got back to last week before we wrap it up. Here's your little moment of happy.
I tend to be pretty trusting.
I can't think of a single clip on the internet that I will consistently laugh at like that. And it just gives me that second nod. It just gives me such a little dopamine bump. It's delightful. Thanks for tuning in tonight, everybody. Thanks for listening or watching or doing all of the things. Next week, actually, no, I got to do the plugs, because we got us a conversation coming up on Wednesday. We sat down with 2 of the folks from Hold My Hand, and brace yourself, y'all. We go to some places, and it gets pretty. I think we're going to have to put a trigger warning legit on this, because some of the things that our guests shared in the conversation got pretty intense. But if you care about education in Alberta, particularly if you care about equity in education in Alberta, boy, this is a conversation that you do not want to miss. It is, it's something else. It's every once in a while we do an episode where I just have to take a breather after it, and this was absolutely one of them. That'll be up for our Patreon sponsors tomorrow, and it will be up on all of our places live streaming on Wednesday night at 8:00. We will be back next Sunday. We're going to have our FOIP update / reveal. It's spicy and fun, and yes, the government appears to be very corrupt, is what I'll say. But you got to wait till Sunday now. See, I'm building dramatic tension. It's all very exciting. In the meantime, and in between time, let's hope for relatively quiet week in Alberta politics. We will see you on Wednesday for that conversation with Hold My Hand, and we'll be back here next Sunday for another live roundup of Alberta politics. In the meantime and in between time, take care of each other. Keep the conversation going.
Thank you.